Hello and welcome back to the Okanagan Reader. I'm your host, Jim Bowering. We're down to the penultimate chapter in Green Comet, the first book in the Green Comet trilogy. In chapter 46, Elgin and Minder are on their way to the get-together, which is being held in a room off the square. Minder is regretting booking Elgin for the talk show the day before. He thought it would be a good idea. Turned out it was a bit of a trial. He also might regret booking the get-together for Elgin and Fran's old apartment. Will the memories be too painful for Elgin? Everyone is there, the five and some others, including Maria and Galatea. Elgin senses that there's something going on, and he's right. It's something fantastic. Here we go then.
Chapter 46. The Get-Together. The get-together was in a room off the square, so they were flying there after breakfast 2 days later. Elgin wasn't saying anything, and Minder was afraid to. He was castigating himself for being such a fool yesterday. He should have known better. He should have seen it coming. In hindsight, it was obvious that Elgin wasn't ready to go on a talk show. But they'd been so convincing. They had assured him that they'd be gentle with Elgin, and it would be nothing more than a chance for the people to see him. Who knew the host would say something so stupid? Minder was afraid to say anything, but he had to. They had said almost nothing over breakfast, and now the silence seemed to be spreading. If they arrived at the get-together like this, it would cast a pall over everything, so he had to do something. "Elgin," he said, cringing at the sound of his voice. "Mm-hmm," said Elgin, looking straight ahead, concentrating on his flying. "Are you all right?" Minder asked lamely. "Mm-hmm." Elgin wasn't helping at all. Minder had to do this himself, so he went straight to the point. "I'm sorry, Elgin. I should have known better. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm." It embarrassed him to sound so pathetic. They flew in silence for a few tens of meters. Then Elgin stopped and turned to face Minder, who was able to stop within a meter or two. Elgin was frowning, but it was just for concentration, nothing like the dreaded legendary face. It looked several times as if he was going to speak, but he said nothing for a long time. Unlike the talk show host, Minder was able to wait quietly through the silence. Not comfortably, but quietly. He knew Elgin would speak eventually, and finally he did. He said, "She said I could have any woman on the Comet." He was shaking his head. He still couldn't believe it. Minder blushed. He was disappointed in himself, but he also found himself feeling angry toward her, even though he knew she meant well. In her own mind, she thought she was flattering her guest, a technique that had always worked before. This time, though, it earned her several minutes of stony silence. Elgin growled, "I don't want any woman. I have Frances." Then he clamped his jaw and glowered at her. She compounded the problem by saying, "But she's—" stopping just in time. She made the same mistake Minder made. She was thinking that it was history, and Frances was a legend, rather than an ordinary living person. She dug herself a deep hole before she stopped digging, but her instincts finally came through. She was able to see past what she thought she knew, to see Elgin as a man in love with his woman, Frances. She got hold of herself, and showed clips from his life, watching his face for the right reaction, keeping things going until she hit on the secret. Ask him about her. It worked. He was happy to talk about her as long as she stuck to the real Frances. He had no time for the blatantly foolish legends, and when she mentioned the Fran sessions she almost lost him again. But when she asked about how they met or about the things they did together, he was relaxed and talkative. She managed to salvage a pretty good show, and she knew instinctively that it would be one of her best, certainly the most memorable. Most importantly, when they signed off, Elgin wasn't frowning. He wasn't exactly smiling, but at least he wasn't scowling at her. He had the same expression now in the corridor, for which Minder was grateful. "I'm sure she meant well, Elgin," he said. She talked to me after the show and she apologized. I believe she really only wanted to give the people a chance to see you." Elgin nodded, but still didn't say anything. "I'm really sorry," Minder said again. Elgin finally spoke, but it was apparent his mind was on a different track. He said, "I need more practice, don't I?" "What?" said Minder. "Talking to people," said Elgin. "Having an ordinary conversation." He shrugged everything. "It seems like every time I talk to someone I don't know, I end up spoiling it." "Spoiling it?" "Yes. First the Fran sessions, then again yesterday." Elgin pursed his lips. "I need to learn how to talk to people." "That wasn't your fault," said Minder. "They should have known better." "No," said Elgin. "I can't expect everyone to know better. They can only be expected to know what they know." He nodded to himself. "I'm the one who should know better. I'm the one who knows, so it's up to me to do the right thing." "But," protested Minder, "it's about Francis. They should give a thought to your feelings." "Francis is a myth to them." Elgin's voice stumbled at that realization, but he carried on. "As I am. Our story has become nothing more than a legend. They don't think of us as real people." "Well, they should," insisted Minder hotly. "Yes, they should," agreed Elgin, "but until they do, I'm going to have to make allowances, especially when it's about Francis." His gaze turned inward. "Especially then." "But why should it be your burden?" Minder asked softly. "Haven't you done enough? Haven't you given enough? Let them do it for a change." "This is what Fran would have told me. When people hold you up above them, it's an honor, but you pay for that with responsibility that you can never drop. It is always up to you." Elgin took a breath and set his shoulders. "I shouldn't have forgotten that," he said. There was nothing for Minder to say to that, so when Elgin flapped his wings and got moving again, he just fell in beside him. They flew in companionable silence, the walls of the corridor sliding smoothly by. Soon the sounds ahead, and subtle changes in air pressure told them they were nearing the square, and right on cue, the entrance rose up beyond the curve of the floor. In a few moments, they broke into the light and color and vibrant life of Green Comet's commons. Elgin stopped a few meters in from the green columns, looking at the natural focus of the square. The statues of him and Francis and Nigel still stood there, the orange columns of the opposite side making an impressive backdrop. Elgin shrugged and asked Minder, "Where to?" Minder swallowed and turned to their right. He raised his arm and pointed to a balcony above the shops, on the yellow side, right over against the orange wall. He looked apprehensively at Elgin's face, which showed surprise and a rapid series of emotions. To his relief there was no anger or rejection. "Is it all right?" he asked. Elgin found his voice and, giving Minder a reassuring glance, said, "Yes, sure, it's fine." He pushed off in that direction. "Come on," he said. "Let's not keep them waiting." Elgin wasn't as calm as he looked. The prospect of going into his old apartment, the home he shared with Francis, hit him harder than he might have thought it would. Being invited to a get-together there by someone else felt strange. If he let himself, he knew he could wind up in a jealous territorial outrage. The very idea that an outsider felt entitled to invite him there was inflammatory. He asked himself what Francis would do, and the answer was immediate and obvious. She would laugh at the irony and take great delight in the company of friends. That made Elgin smile at himself, and his mood changed instantly to one of anticipation. As they approached, an iceberry patch resolved itself in his vision. It was on the wall to the right of their balcony, right where he and Francis had originally started it. Of course, this wasn't the same iceberry patch. That one was destroyed when Green Comet went into black mode to hide from the scout. Now, in the name of accuracy, it was back where it used to be in this faithful replica of his old life. He altered their trajectory to take them to the iceberries, rather than directly to the apartment. When he got there, he picked a big plump one and popped it in his mouth. After savoring the mouth-watering burst of flavor, he said to Minder, "They're always best right off the wall, aren't they?" He looked at the small patch and the expanse of empty wall around it. There's a lot of wasted space here, isn't there? Why such a small patch? People wanted it to be like it was, said Minder. Elgin was going to point out the foolishness of that when there was a buzz and a flash of color, and he found himself looking at a hummingbird. Speechless with surprise, he watched it plunge its beak into an iceberry and begin feeding. He glanced at Minder, who smiled and nodded, then went back to watching the bird. It took a good long drink from the berry, then went on to another. Two seemed to be enough because it backed off, shot its tongue a couple of times, gave them a look, and buzzed off. Elgin realized that the bird hadn't been flapping its wings while feeding. It seemed happily adapted to floating with its wings tucked away. He asked Minder, "When did that happen?" "Just a few months ago, actually," said Minder. "We decided to try a couple of breeding pairs to see if it would work." "That must have been strange. How long did it take them to get used to microgravity?" "Almost right away. The theory is that they have such a strong positional sense that the lack of gravity turns out to be secondary." He leaned in to examine the punctured, collapsed iceberries. "The big surprise was how they took to these. We started by putting out nectar for them, but they seem to prefer the berries." "That is surprising. I'd have thought they'd need concentrated sugars. Iceberries are sweet, but not that sweet." "That's exactly what everyone thought, but they seem to be able to adapt their metabolism." "So we're not the only ones who can adapt," said Elgin. He looked across the square in the direction the hummingbird had flown, his gaze falling on the people there. His breath caught as he had a sharp vision of just how much they had adapted. From the warmth, security, and especially the sense of belonging back on the planet, to this. He gasped at the vertigo when he visualized the isolation and enormous probability of their situation. Then he thought of the hummingbird calmly feeding on an iceberry, and the look it gave them before it flew away. He chuckled, and decided he would take it as a good sign. He looked at the bare wall and nodded. He would see to it that the iceberry patch grew. "Come on," he said to Minder. "Let's go inside." They went in by the balcony, as he often used to, and they could see that there were people in the right-hand living room. Stanton met them at the entrance with Galatea, and Elgin caught a quick flash of concern on his face before it was erased by a welcoming smile. Past him, Elgin could see the doctor, his bald head shining softly in the glow from the ceiling. There was another couple, and it took a moment of staring before he recognized Buzzard. Then it was a simple matter to deduce that his companion must be Maria. But what was wrong with Buzzard? A movement in his peripheral vision brought his head around, and there was Nigel. He couldn't stop a flash of disappointment at the presence of Fran's greatest adversary, but he tried to keep it down. He caught a glance between Minder and the doctor, wondered about it, then packed it away for later. He turned back to Buzzard and Maria, puzzled. He moved forward, and Maria's eyes sharpened, but Buzzard wouldn't look up. Elgin glanced at Stanton and the doctor, looking for some indication, but they both reacted with discomfort. Minder was obviously trying to keep his expression neutral, and failing as usual. Nigel looked as if he didn't see anything. "Buzzard," he said, moving forward again. Simultaneously, Stanton moved to intercept him. Buzzard turned his face into the shelter of Maria's body, and she raised a palm to stop Elgin, her movements gentle, but her eyes fiercely protective. For some reason, it evoked a memory of the time Maria carried Buzzard in the hand of the Smasher that day in the square. Elgin stopped, his face perplexed. He looked the question at everyone, and Stanton tried to answer it. "Buzzard is having a little trouble these days," he said, looking at his friend sheltering under the protective wing of Maria. "He overextended himself, and is having a kind of mental exhaustion. He can't take too much stimulation or he gets anxious." Maria nodded, and the doctor confirmed it. "Stanton is right," he said. "Buzzard needs a good long spell of rest and recuperation." Elgin asked the obvious. "Then what's he doing here? And should we be talking about him as if he weren't?" "Ah," said the doctor. "Normally that would be rude, but in his condition, with his inability to interact directly, talking about him like this is a good way of including him." He nodded assertively. "And he insisted on being here, just like the rest of us." Insisted on being here, repeated Elgin, at this get-together? Yes, said the doctor. We all wanted to be here for this. Elgin looked at them all. Stanton nodded, and Galatea winked at him. Maria smiled, and Buzzard was peeking out from under her wing, though not making eye contact. Nigel nodded while looking in the direction of the doctor, who looked deeply satisfied. All right, said Elgin to the doctor. What's going on here? The doctor, smiling broadly, started to speak, stopped, tried again, and paused. After a murmuration of laughter, he said, After working for this for so long, there's too much to say all at once. Everyone made noises of agreement. Just start talking, Doctor, said Elgin. I'm sure it will sort itself out. Okay, said the doctor. I guess the best place to start is why we all wanted to be here for this. He looked around and got general agreement. They seemed to have decided that he could do the talking. Very well, he said. Elgin, you remember saying that you didn't want to be brought out of hibernation without good reason, don't you? Yes, said Elgin, his skin prickling, and I remember being brought up for supposedly good reasons, too. Yes, said the doctor, sorry about that. It's not your fault, it wasn't you. No, if they had asked me, I'd have told them to leave you alone. Everyone voiced their agreement. Unfortunately, I was asleep at the time. Never mind, said Elgin. What's done is done. I assume you have a good reason this time. He swallowed and finished tentatively. It must be about Frances. He looked frightened. The doctor hurried to reassure him. She's okay, Elgin. Nothing has happened to her. She's still safe at the center. When Elgin relaxed, he continued, The thing is, we think we've figured out the problem. With a gleeful chortle in his voice, he said what he'd waited centuries to say. We think we're going to be able to bring her up at last. Elgin had nothing to say. His mind went blank for a moment, then filled with swirling fragments of thought. The doctor waited, not pressing him for a response. Finally, Elgin settled his brain down enough to speak. But what do you say about something you've hoped for so long? When it's been unattainable for so long that you've unconsciously begun to believe that it could never happen? How do you start to believe again? Really? Was all he could say. Yes, said the doctor. We think we finally know what the problem is and how to fix it. We have Buzzard to thank for that. Elgin looked at Buzzard, who was now completely out from under Maria's wing, though still looking nervous and fragile. He met Elgin's eyes, but couldn't hold them, looking down and away. Maria spoke for him. Buzzard decided to study the problem, she said, many centuries ago. She shook her head. I couldn't tell you how long he's been doing it. But he's an engineer, said Elgin, not a geneticist. I know, said Maria. That's what I said when he wasted waking after waking, when the wakings got shorter and farther apart, when he got so deep into it that he began to lose the ability to function in the real world. She was looking at Buzzard, her eyes furious and glowing with love. But he told me he had to do it, and he told me he would understand if I wanted to leave. Tears floated away from her eyes, as if I could do that. Buzzard struggled to speak. In a slow, tired variation on the repetitive way he spoke when Elgin first met him, he said, Okay, was okay, not crazy. Then he buried his face in Maria's fur. Elgin was almost overcome by their generosity. I know you're not crazy, Buzzard, he said. His voice muffled by Maria's fur, Buzzard struggled to say, All done. 10 times. All good. Elgin, his voice catching, said, No magic? With a tired version of his delighted smile, Buzzard said, No magic. The room relaxed with a general sigh. Maria looked at Elgin over Buzzard's head, her smile acknowledging his gratitude. She lifted a hand, opening her embrace, inviting him to enter it. He flew across and joined in her protective hug, feeling Buzzard's body tense, then go quiet again. Thank you, Buzzard, he said softly, gratified by the murmured response. So close to Maria's face, he whispered to her, "Thank you, too." They stayed that way, mingling their breath, their warmth, and their auras, until the moment was right for Elgin to gently break away. He said to her, "What else do you do? For work, I mean, when you're not taking care of Buzzard." She grinned at him. "I operate smashers," she said. Buzzard said, "Huh," which was his present version of the peals of laughter they were all used to. That allowed everyone to laugh, discharging some of the tension. Elgin turned back to the doctor, on the left side of the room, opposite Maria and Buzzard. "I want to know everything," he said, "but first, I want to know why all this was kept from me." "Of course," said the doctor, nodding his glowing dome. "We kept it from you for 2 reasons. The first was a request from Fran." That surprised Elgin. "She wanted you to keep it from me?" "Yes. She made me promise that you wouldn't find out until there was at least a glimmer of hope." "But why?" Elgin couldn't understand his Fran conspiring to deceive him. "She was afraid," said the doctor. "She thought that she might end up as some grisly undead thing stalking your mind. Better, she thought, to just be quietly asleep." Elgin reflexively rejected the idea. He knew she could never become that to him. But then he thought back to the misery and darkness he'd endured anyway, and he bowed once again to her greater wisdom. She knew him better than he knew himself, and she could foresee what was still unclear to him in hindsight. He nodded and said, "Okay, and the other reason?" "The other reason," said the doctor, "had to do with you." He glanced at the others for moral support before saying it. Then, "We had to be sure of your mental state." "My mental state?" Elgin was shocked. They were talking about his mental state behind his back? Everyone was embarrassed when he looked at them. "There's nothing wrong with my mental state." "We know," said the doctor. "We know that now." He waited until Elgin caught his eye, then stated their case clearly. "Just as much as we're trying to return Frances to you, we also want to ensure that we return you to her, healthy and whole." Elgin was glaring at him, and he swung it around the room. All he saw, though, was concern and love, and he knew they were right. What would be the point of bringing her back to him if he was too messed up to be any good to her? He nodded. They were right again. "You see," said the doctor, "if we had found you were unwell, then we could simply have delayed bringing her up while we treated you." "Of course," said Elgin. "It's just the idea of it all happening without me knowing about it." "I understand," said the doctor, "and I apologize, but we couldn't very well tell you, could we?" "No, of course not." There was a contemplative silence. Then Elgin said, "How did you manage it, anyway? I can usually tell when something rings true or not, and nothing jumped out at me." "Ah," said the doctor, indicating Minder. "Your Minder is responsible for that." Elgin looked at Minder, who blushed. "Minder?" he said incredulously. "But how? He couldn't keep a secret if he was the only person on the comet." Minder blushed harder. "Well," said the doctor, "you might have noticed that he blushes a bit." "Yes, it caught my attention." "So, what better camouflage?" The realization hit like a smack in the mouth. Elgin remembered all the times he thought Minder was overreacting to something, and realized that many of them could have been alerting him that something was up. He didn't notice, because he assumed it was just Minder blushing again for no reason. What better camouflage indeed? He grinned at Minder, who surprised everyone by blushing even harder. "You bugger," he said. The resulting blush got murmurs of appreciation and a smattering of applause. "You guys," pleaded Minder, but he was smiling. When they entered the apartment, Minder stopped just inside, staying near the window with Stanton and Galatea. Now that Elgin was looking that way, Stanton caught his attention and indicated a display screen on the left wall, over the doctor's head. When everyone was looking, he started a video, eliciting a gasp of recognition from everyone except Nigel. Showing on the screen was the familiar monochromatic record of the joining of the comets, the original joining, from before the visitor. But this was a very specific angle. It could only have been taken by someone who was outside, far from Green Comet, where they could see around the curve of the little comet. This could only be Buzzard's video of his smoke rings, all copies of which he had destroyed during the debates. "What is this?" asked Elgin. "A recreation?" "No," said Stanton. "This is an original copy." "But I thought Buzzard destroyed them all," said Elgin, "during the debates, when we were making sacrifices." "You and everyone else," said Stanton. "That was the idea." "You mean you and Buzzard held a copy back?" "No, absolutely not. Buzzard believed he destroyed them all." Stanton grinned a wicked grin. "Buzzard's a bright boy. He's smarter than anyone I know. But this old fox is pretty sly, too." "Huh," said Buzzard. "Huh, huh." His face, the eyes swinging between the screen and Stanton, was almost animated. Those who knew him could see his old grin underneath there. "You people are full of surprises," said Elgin. "Is there anything else?" He looked pointedly at the doctor, who seemed to be most like the host of the party. "Well," said the doctor, "now that we've ascertained that you're fit for duty, we might as well talk about bringing Fran up." That shocked Elgin, even though he now knew that was why they were here. Even though he thought he was ready for it, as ready as waiting 1,500 years could make him, the sudden immediacy shocked him. He found himself looking for some way to delay it. In truth, he was surprised to find that he was afraid of it. "What is it, Elgin?" asked the doctor gently. "Well," said Elgin, "it's been so long." His eyes were vulnerable and frightened. He swallowed and said quietly, "I'm so old." He was afraid that they might have grown apart, especially as he kept aging while she didn't. What would she want with an old man like me? "You're worried that you're too old for her," said the doctor. "Yes," said Elgin. "She stayed young while I kept getting older. People will think she's with her grandfather." The doctor chuckled. "I think that's a little extreme." "Yeah, well, what about our life expectancy?" said Elgin. "When I'm gone she'll have years of being alone, and I know what that's like." "Elgin," said the doctor, shaking his head, "have you looked in a mirror lately?" "Sure, why?" "Haven't you noticed that you look about 40? The doctor indicated their companions. "Haven't you noticed that we all do?" He corrected himself, "except Minder, of course." Elgin looked, taking care to really notice, and it was true. They all, with the exception of Minder, looked about the same age. As the doctor said, they all appeared to be about 40 years old. "And it's not just appearance," said the doctor. "All our organs, all our systems are close to the same physiological age. Hibernation and its maintenance and repair activities seem to keep us there. So when we wake up Fran, you'll be the same age." "Oh," said Elgin. He looked at his hands, turning them over and back. They looked the same as ever, but only now did he realize the significance of that. He laughed at himself. "There's something else I missed," he said. "You're not the only one," said the doctor. "It took a long time before it dawned on me, too, or anybody." He nodded while everybody voiced their agreement. "I really don't have enough data to make a proper estimate, but working with what I do have, and keeping in mind everything we don't know, I think we should be good for at least another 100 years. He frowned. "F.A.," he added. "If nothing unexpected happens." He turned up his palms. "It's nothing more than a guess, really." Everyone laughed, assuring the doctor that they wouldn't hold him to it. "We got it," said Nigel, properly joining the conversation for the first time. "We should live another 100 years, give or take, but it could be 1,000 for all we know, or we could start dropping tomorrow. Does that about cover it?" "Yes," said the doctor, pleased that they understood. "But the likelihood of 1,000 years, or of tomorrow, is relatively low. Splitting the difference at 100 seems logical, since that is closest to our normal range. It's still just a guess, though." "It's good enough for me, doctor," said Nigel. "I'm grateful for anything, really." "Mm-hmm," said the doctor. "Mostly I'm grateful that I lasted long enough to find the spy." Nigel gave a deep sigh. "Long enough to fulfill my promise to Francis." He looked at Elgin, though not quite. Elgin moved his head, trying to meet Nigel's eyes. But when he finally did, there was still no connection. He realized that here was something else he had missed. Nigel was blind. The silence told Nigel that Elgin had noticed. "Yes, Elgin," he said. "I'm totally blind." Elgin stared mutely. He couldn't think of anything to say, and his curiosity made him want to minutely examine Nigel's eyes, to find something that his engineer's brain could figure out. Finally, his innate Comet politeness made him speak. "I'm sorry," he said. "What happened?" "It was those 14 years outside in a pressure suit," said Nigel. He glanced at the doctor, his sightless eyes including him. "The doctor warned me," he said. "He tried to get me to come in, to go to the center and get fixed up. But I had a job to do. No one else knew as much as I did. No one else would have cared as much." "Fixed up?" asked Elgin. The doctor jumped in. He knew Nigel didn't really want to go into the details, so he did it for him. "Cancers," he said. "All those years of constant exposure to cosmic radiation did a lot of genetic damage." The doctor shook his head. "I tried to warn him, but he kept brushing me off." Nigel had turned his blank gaze down, obviously not comfortable with the exposure. Elgin said, "I understand, Doctor." Nigel had a job to do. A job for Francis. He couldn't concern himself with the possibility of getting sick sometime in the future. "It was more than a possibility," said the doctor. Nigel stepped back into the conversation. "It's not as bad as it looks, Elgin. It's the last thing to clear up. Then I'll be fine." "Why didn't you stay in hibernation? Why would you come up when you were still sick?" asked Elgin. "The same reason as everyone else," said Nigel. "I had a request in to be brought up if there was to be an attempt to revive Francis." He raised his chin. "Whatever condition I was in." Elgin could hear the music, and it was good. He could finally see Nigel for what he really was. Not a fool, or a villain for opposing Francis. He was obviously a good man, whose dedication to the comet was at least as great as his own. As was his dedication to Francis. He said, "I understand, Nigel. Some things just have to be done, whether for the comet or for Francis." Nigel nodded. "I knew you'd get it," he said. "We're more alike than you know." Again he looked at Elgin, his blind eyes not quite making contact. "I'm in love with Fran too, you know." Elgin felt a little rush of jealousy, which he tried to quell. "I know," he said. "Everyone's in love with Fran." "I don't just mean that," said Nigel. "I mean head over heels, forgetting to eat, flying into things in love." He paused, but Elgin didn't reply. "I was just like you," he said. "About a year before you got up, I was smitten too." This time Elgin did speak. "Well then," he said, "why didn't you do something about it?" "I did," insisted Nigel. "I tried talking to her, but I kept ending up either tongue-tied or prattling. I got on the planning committee so I could be around her, but I could never bring myself to take advantage of it." He shrugged helplessly. "I wanted her, but I could never imagine that she could want me." This was ringing bells for Elgin. He'd had all the same symptoms. The difference was that Fran had acted to overcome them. Otherwise he probably would have ended up like Nigel. He was right. They were a lot alike. "Well," said Nigel, "eventually I missed the moment. After a couple of months of dithering, I just gave up. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it, so I decided to save myself the stress." He laughed at his younger self, but not derisively. He had more of a kindly sympathy for him. "After that, I tried to find ways to make myself more useful to her, to stay close, you know." "Yes," said Elgin, "I do. I most certainly know that." "Then when you came along," continued Nigel, "and I saw the two of you together, I saw what could have been." "Is that when you began to oppose her?" asked Elgin. Nigel gasped in surprise, his mouth open but unable to speak. Sounds of protest came from the others. Elgin heard the voices of Stanton and the doctor saying no, and it was never like that. Nigel spoke at last. "I was never opposed to her, Elgin." "But the debates," said Elgin, "the things you said." "Those were things that needed to be said," Nigel told him. "I knew it, and so did Fran. In fact, she asked me to fight hard. She said the comet needed it. She said we needed to make that decision in the face of the clearest of options. Nigel's gaze was now obviously in the deep past. She knew, he finished quietly, that Green Comet would be better off if we went with our eyes wide open. Once again Elgin heard it. He knew Francis would have said exactly those things for exactly those reasons. The music was harmonious. His respect for Nigel deepened, and he felt ashamed of his earlier suspicion. The man had acted with honor and an honest sense of duty. Now, at last, he could see clearly. "I see now," he said, "why Fran had so much respect for you." Pleasure blossomed on Nigel's face. "That makes it worthwhile," he said. "Fran's respect means more to me than anything." Elgin looked at him, moved by empathy. He couldn't imagine loving Fran that much and conceding her to someone else. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what might have been?" "Sometimes," admitted Nigel, "but it never lasts long." He smiled at Elgin. "As soon as I saw you two together, I knew it was right." "But it could have been you," said Elgin. "No, it couldn't. The difference between what I felt and what you guys had was immediately obvious. When you were together, you glowed. There's no comparison." "I don't know," said Elgin. "If it was me, I don't think I could be so generous." "Are you sure? If you saw that it was so right, if you saw Fran so happy, do you really think you would deny her that?" Elgin thought about it, and knew it was true. Nigel was right. They were more alike than he realized. The doctor broke the silence. "Why don't we see if we can let Fran speak for herself?" he asked. "I think it's high time we finish the talking and start the doing." They all agreed, and Elgin said, "I'm ready. Let's go." He made as if to turn for the door. "Hold on," the doctor said, laughing. "Just a minute. We still have to finish with the talking." When Elgin turned back and tucked in his wings, he said, "There are some details you should think about." "Okay, doctor," said Elgin, taking a listening pose. "Right. So you're well aware of Frances's imprinted genes?" "Yes, they're the reason she keeps getting sick." "That's right," said the doctor. "At least, that's what we thought." When Elgin's gaze sharpened, he added, "It turns out that we had those repaired properly the first time." "What went wrong, then?" "We couldn't figure that out." The doctor scratched his smooth head. "So we did the obvious. We repaired and activated the dormant side of the gene pair just in case." "Don't tell me. That didn't work either." "No." The doctor spread his hands, reliving the frustration. "We were out of ideas. When Buzzard offered to do one of his deep analyses, we were glad of the help." When everyone looked at Buzzard, he ducked his head to escape the intensity. But he raised a hand in acknowledgement. The doctor said, "Buzzard's work quickly showed that all our initial attempts were successful. Fran should have been able to live a normal life." He shrugged expressively. "She should have been better than before, since we managed to repair her imprinted genes." He cocked an eyebrow. "That's a real breakthrough, by the way." "But it didn't help," anticipated Elgin. "No!" He raised his fists in front of him, as if to attack an unseen enemy. Lowering them to his lap, he said, "You have no idea how frustrating it was." "Well," said Elgin, "I have some idea. But I take your meaning." "Of course," said the doctor, mildly abashed. No one could have a better sense of the frustration than Elgin. Anyway, to shorten a long story, Buzzard finally figured out that the problem was in the telomeres. "Telomeres?" "Yes, I won't go all technical on you. Telomeres are little things that keep the ends of chromosomes tidy." The doctor saw incomplete understanding in Elgin's face. "Like a rope, say. It needs some way of securing its ends so it doesn't unravel." That was better. "So when Buzzard figured that out, we were on our way." Elgin said, "So the telomeres were unraveling?" "No," said the doctor. "That's the thing. They were holding together just fine. That's why we didn't know there was anything wrong with them." "What was it then?" "When Buzzard analyzed it, he didn't stop there," said the doctor with a smile. "He took a good look at the telomeres and discovered that they weren't working properly, even though they seemed fine by outward appearances." "Okay, then you fixed them?" "Ha!" said the doctor, rolling his eyes. "If only it could have been that easy. No, we had to find a way of making them work without unraveling." He took a breath. "Anyway, that was long and difficult, especially for Buzzard." He shook his head. "Can you imagine the variables?" "No," said Elgin. "Me neither. But the upshot is that Fran's telomeres will work and will never unravel. We hope, anyway." "You hope?" "Oh, the odds are really good. It's just that I can never promise a probability of 1 on something like this. It wouldn't be honest." He added in a reassuring tone, "But it looks very good." "I understand, Doctor," said Elgin. "Thank you." "You're welcome. But thank Buzzard mostly. We put a lot of effort into it, but without his insights, we'd have got nowhere." He paused while Buzzard was showered with congratulations. "And you can thank millions of little machines as well, for many years of untiring, meticulous work." "You mean the nano-tools?" "Yes," said the doctor. "They look for blockages and whatnot, scan and repair genes, destroy cancerous cells." "I know," said Elgin. "I mean, I've never worked with them, but I know about them." "Very good," said the doctor. "They move in liquid nitrogen, which is why we need to keep the sleepers a little warm, and they're powered by induction." "I know most of this, Doctor." "Of course you do, but please indulge me." When Elgin nodded, he continued. "These little machines can send and receive signals, and they combine to form a network. Each one has a tiny bit of memory and a tiny bit of processing power, but together they form a quite powerful computer. The result is a machine that can analyze in the whole and act in the particular." "Okay," said Elgin. "All things we learned during orientation." "Ah," said the doctor. "But something they don't teach you in orientation is that all these features combine to create the conditions for complexity. There's the large number of components, the high degree of connectivity, the, he looked at Stanton asking, where the system gets energy from an external source." "Thermodynamic openness," said Stanton. "Right," said the doctor. "I always forget that one. Anyway, all these things go together and, under the right conditions, give rise to an emergent system, a novel entity that didn't exist before and couldn't be reliably predicted, but which is maintained as long as the conditions are met." "I know a bit about that," said Elgin. "You end up with something called a complex adaptive system." "That's right," said the doctor. "Essentially you get a whole, which is more than the sum of its parts." "Okay," said Elgin. "So the nanotools work together to form this new entity. How does this affect Fran?" "It has everything to do with Fran, because it was her hunch that made us look at it and run the experiments." "Experiments?" said Elgin. "You experimented on Fran?" "Not on her as such. Rather we experimented on the system, as suggested by her, to see if there might be something there we were overlooking." The doctor looked pleased with himself. "There was," he said. "Or rather there might be. If this turns out to be real, then the nanotools might be good for more than repair work." "Like what?" asked Elgin, content to let the doctor indulge himself. "Fran thought there might be something going on there, so she got us to build a detector to look for patterns. It took a long time, and at first it didn't look as if anything was happening. Eventually, though, when we looked on long enough time scales, something began to emerge." Elgin's mind was jumping ahead, but he refused to allow it. "What?" he asked quietly. The doctor was so excited that he rubbed his hands vigorously. "Fran's hunch was that there might be a form of consciousness down there." "This emergent machine might be conscious?" "Kind of," said the doctor. "But more than that. Fran thought that because the nanotools crudely replicate the structure of the brain, and because they have similar connectivity to the actual neurons, then maybe the person has a form of consciousness. Or maybe a consciousness emerges that is similar to the person." The doctor shrugged again. "It's really hard to say." "Are you saying that Fran might be conscious down there?" "Well, yes, maybe." "You've got to send me down," said Elgin. "You've got to send me down now." When no one moved, he shouted, "She's all alone!" The doctor raised his hands, saying, "No, no, no. It's not like that." "What do you mean?" demanded Elgin, unplacated. "How do you know? She's been alone for over 1,500 years. Just wait, Elgin, said the doctor. Hear me out. When Elgin subsided, he said, if what the detector found is really a sign of consciousness, and that's still a big question, and if it's her and not some other phenomenon, then it must be operating at an extremely slow rate. Slow? What does that mean? The doctor frowned, then said, I won't bother trying to lay out the whole thing. Suffice it to say that before she went down, Fran arranged a little test. We were to begin a simple pattern, and she was to reply by completing it. Did it work? Yes. Then it's her. What else could it be? I agree, said the doctor, but please let me finish. At first, we thought the experiment was a failure because we got no reply. We didn't give up, though. We kept collecting and analyzing data, and finally, after a long time, we began to see a pattern. What do you mean by a long time? Asked Elgin. Years, said the doctor. Eventually, we calculated the ratio to be approximately 20 years to 1 minute. 20 years? Elgin was already calculating how many minutes that would be for Fran, but he was also intrigued by the philosophical question. How can something operating that slowly hang together? That's the question, isn't it? Said the doctor. That and whether it's really her, and we won't know that for 20 years either. Stanton cleared his throat. It's not necessarily impossible that something could work that slowly. Our brains don't calculate as quickly as computers do by the same kind of ratio, and we don't have a problem with that. That's true, said the doctor. We can't dismiss it simply because of the time factor. But calculations aren't consciousness, said Elgin, tempering his hopes. That's also true, said the doctor, bringing them back to nowhere. Everyone was quiet, thinking about the possibilities. Then he said briskly, there's only one way to find out, and that's not going to happen today. So meanwhile, let's have some tea and tell some stories. No one had an argument with that.